Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to be moving back into philosophy, and we're going to be talking about Plato's Dialectic, his form of kind of searching for the truth. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit before we go into the dialectic, though, with Plato is his idea of the world of forms. I mentioned this a little bit in the allegory of the cave, where Plato saw the real world as the world of forms, the unchanging world. He saw everything in this world was just a poor representation of that world of forms, a poor imposter, if you will. And so his dialectic is trying to get towards the truth. And the way that he and Socrates get towards the truth is by asking questions. And so one of the sections I want to talk about today is book one of the Republic, because I think that book gives you a good feel for how this dialectic works. Um, with the dialectic, the reason that he is asking questions is that he wants to get to not just the superficial answer, but the form, the true answer behind it all. And the reason he does this is that most of us in everyday life will use terms and we really don't have a solid definition of that term. We will use you know, a word and we'll assume that everybody knows what the word means. And in book one of the Republic, the word that they're trying to get to the heart of is justice. And so, you know, Socrates is asking for, what is a definition of justice? And one of the first definitions that he gets is to, speak the truth and pay your debts. And so he starts to question that. Okay, justice is speaking the truth and paying your debts. But what if speaking the truth is something that at that moment is a bad thing? For example, you know, go with the we'll go with the you're hiding someone who's running from someone who's going to murder them. You know, where is so and so? Is it justice to say, oh, they're hiding in the closet right there, go kill them? Or is it justice in that case to not tell the truth? Is paying what is owed? He goes into an example in book one of the Republic of what if someone leaves you, their armaments and their armor and things like that, and then they come back to you and ask for them when they're not in their right mind, when you can tell that they're in a rage and they're going to do something with it that'll get them into trouble. So is it just to give them that when you know it's going to get them killed or get them imprisoned? And so this doesn't stand up as a proper definition for justice. And so another definition is given is it is the repayment of debt, of good for repaying good to your friends, bad to your enemies. And Socrates goes in and starts to question this and says, why is this necessarily good to do bad to your enemies? And he gives examples about, if a horse is sick, um, does it is it good to be evil to the horse? Will that make the horse better? And he's getting at the point of, does returning, giving evil and bad things to your enemies, is that really a good thing? Is that something that a just man should do? Because if you do return evil for evil, you are not allowing that person to possibly be reformed. And this is one of the questions that is relevant through, the present time, especially when you think about the prison system. Is prison about just punishing bad people? You lock them up with other bad people and punish them, or would it be more? Would it be better? Would it be more just if you rehabilitate them instead of sending them into a place of concentrated bad people and thinking they're going to get better? Perhaps you should put them in an environment where, they can have positive role models around them, people that can help them change their lives. Now, this is not a question that we're going to answer here today, because this is a question that, has been debated in book after book on both sides. But this is the kind of thing that he's, getting at with, you know, should you do evil to someone who does evil to you? You know, or does this just make everything keep getting worse? For example, something happens, a person blames you for it, they lash out at you. Um, you may not have had anything to do with it, but does lashing out back at them, doing evil to them, is that going to fix the situation? Or is that just going to keep escalating the situation and keep making them worse and keep making everything worse? So he gets another answer a little while later in the book, where it talks about justice is obeying the will of the strong, and he questions this. He says, "Do you mean the strong by the people that are physically stronger, because they may not be the most intelligent of people? Just because they're physically strong doesn't mean they're intelligent and knows really what's in their best interest." And the person says, "No, I'm talking about the state. The state is the most powerful, and so whatever the will of the state is, you should, justice is following the will of the state, whether it's a dictator, whether it's a democratic state, whether it's an aristocratic state, you follow the will of whoever's in charge." And Socrates backs up again and he says, "Well, are the people that are in charge infallible?" And the person he's talking to responds, "No, they're not infallible." And so he says, "So if what they want you to do it turns out to be against their best interest, then should you do it?" And the answer to that is no, because you're going to harm them. You're not you know doing what's in their best interest just because you did what they said. This sets up basically for the rest of what the Republic turns out to be, which is trying to figure out what justice is by trying to figure out how do you construct a just society. That justice can only really exist within a just society. And in future episodes, we will go into the Republic and talk about how he lays out that just society. But for today, I don't want to go into that. What I do want to go into, though, is that this whole idea of the dialectic, of questioning and trying to get closer and closer to a precise meaning for the words, is something that is still done in philosophy. If you read a lot of philosophy, it seems like everybody's defining terms. And there's a reason for this, because most people do use terms in a very vague way. And if you're using a term and someone else is using the same term, but you're not using it in the same way, it turns out that you're not really able to understand each other. And so you have to set out, okay, this is what this means when we use this word. And I'll give you an example. Every field has their words that are specifically used in a different way, possibly within that field. In philosophy, the term intentional has a very different meaning for philosophy than it does for the common usage of the word. For the common usage of the word, I ask you, what does intentional mean? You might say it's something that's done deliberately or something that's done on purpose. And this is not exactly how philosophy uses the word, especially the phenomenologists. The phenomenologist using intentional is going to use intentional to mean objects that consciousness directs itself towards, which sounds very complicated, but it's not as bad as it sounds. For example, if I'm thinking about this mouse, um, this mouse is the intentional object of my consciousness. It's what my consciousness directs itself towards. It's what I'm thinking about. And that is very different than on purpose or deliberate. It has some overlap because I'm deliberately focusing on it, but it's a much more specific meaning. Um, Another example of this would be the word theory. Theory has different meanings depending on who's using it. A theory in general, and in layman's terms, you might say, I have a theory that so and so doesn't like me. That means you have a speculation based on your observations or a few facts. Theory in science is very different. A theory in science has a much higher um, standard of proof that it has to hold up to. Scientists just can't say, I have a theory that the moon is made out of cheese. Theories in science have to hold up to observations. They have to be able to be constantly challenged and be able to meet every challenge. And as long as the theory keeps meeting every challenge, then the theory is able to explain reality and is considered a solid theory. Until you can find something that contradicts it and proves it wrong, that theory is pretty much as close to set in stone as you can get. Again, it always puts itself out there to be challenged, but it is something that every time it gets challenged, it meets that challenge. And if a theory in science doesn't meet the challenge, then that means the theory will either have to be expanded or, you know, shrunken down or discarded altogether in favor of a theory that does a better job of explaining everything. For example, people say, I have a theory that, people don't like me. Is not the same as the theory of gravity, because the theory of gravity pretty much works every time that we've ever, known. If I drop this, you know, every time I let go of it, it will fall. So it's a theory that is based on the ability to stand up to challenges. Now, in everyday terms, there's a lot of words that get misused, and they're words that have very strong feelings with them, but they have very weak meanings. Uh, One of these words, for example, is patriotic. People think they use the term patriotic, and it's assumed that everybody knows what that word means. Well, at the base of the word patriotic, it just means you love your country. There's no other meaning to that other than you love your country. It doesn't say anything about how you should behave. What does loving your country mean you should do? Um, because two people can rightly use the word patriotic when talking about themselves and both be correct. One person might say, I'm patriotic, and whatever my government says or whatever my leader says, I'm going to do it and I'm going to follow along because I'm patriotic. And a person on the other side can say, I'm patriotic, I love my country, but if my leaders are taking us down the wrong path, if they're making foolish decisions, if they're making harmful decisions, I will go against those decisions. I will resist those decisions. I will resist their authority because I'm patriotic and I don't want them destroying my country. So you have one word, patriotic, that can mean two completely opposite things. It can mean this or this, and both of them are correct. Both of them would be right in saying that is patriotic because you do love your country. And a lot of these words like patriotic are used to manipulate people. Another word that is similar to that is democratic. When somebody says, such and such is democratic, democratic has a lot of room for interpretation. It doesn't just mean there's, voting that's fair and free, and it just means there's voting going on. It doesn't say how widely that voting is, allowed. Can everybody vote? Can only a few people vote? It doesn't say anything about whether the counting of the voting is fair. Everybody voted, but they just took the votes and threw them out, but it was democratic. You got to vote. So when somebody says something is democratic, not democratic like the party, but democratic, there is a lot of things that are kind of assumed. And this is the problem with language. I've talked about this a little bit before. We have denotation and connotation. The denotation is the dictionary definition. The connotation is how people take that word, how that word is viewed. Democratic and patriotic are positive words for most people. And so if I say, vote for me because it's the patriotic thing to do, well, how is that patriotic? But that word is positive, and I've associated that positive word with myself. And so there will be people that will be swayed by that. And one of the things that Plato is doing, and that every philosopher after Plato does, is they're really sticklers for language. Are we all using the same term in the same way? And everyday language takes a lot of words for granted. It makes a lot of assumptions, and people make the assumption that because I use this word this way, this other person will use this word this way. And this is a big reason that we have a lot of disagreements. Is partially it's a disagreement in language. People say, I'm the patriotic one. I believe in this. And the other person says, you're not patriotic at all. I'm the patriotic one because I believe in that. These are things that philosophers are trying to get beyond. So you will see when you read a lot of philosophy that there is a lot of attention paid to language. Because language, if it is sloppy, if the word choice is not good, then it is very easy to either confuse or mislead people. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how that works. We're going to do a lot more on logical fallacies, but this is something that is a logical fallacy. It's a type of logical fallacy where you get people to sway one way or another because you use emotionally charged words. You use red herring words. You have a political enemy, and you say, well, you can't support this person. They're a traitor, and a traitor is a very, emotionally loaded word. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they've betrayed the country. It could just mean that they've betrayed something that that person feels is a foundation of the country, or betrays something that that person feels should be a foundation of the country. And so these words, as they're used, tend to sway us emotionally. And philosophy, for a large part, for most philosophers, there are philosophers that deal with emotion and how emotion is essential, but a lot of the philosophers try to limit that. They try to limit emotion. They try to limit, the sloppy use of language. And this is one of the reasons in these podcasts that I'm doing both, philosophy, literature, but then I'm also doing diagramming sentences. I know they don't tend to be as popular of episodes as the others, but the diagramming is really getting into, okay, let's dig into language and let's, see if things are meaning what they seem like people say, or if people are just playing games with language. Because you can construct sentences in a way that it seems like you're saying something when you're not really saying much at all, or you're saying the opposite. There's a quote from a politician, and I won't name their name, but they asked if they were going to cut Medicare and Social Security. And, the answer that the politician gave was, we won't cut Social Security from anybody we feel deserves it. Now, on the surface, people wanting to hear that Social Security is not going to be cut, here, we're not going to cut Social Security. But they forget to factor in the rest of the sentence. The rest of the sentence is from anybody that we feel deserves it. And so who is this group that deserves it? Is it just relatives of the politicians? Is it just the wealthy when they retire? Is it, nobody deserves it? They feel nobody deserves it. And so this is one of the reasons that Philosophers are very careful with language, um, and you have to be as well. Because when you are told things, when you see political speeches, when you see advertisements, be aware of the language and be aware of, be a little bit like Plato and Socrates. And when you start hearing these words, start questioning, how is it exactly that they're using this word? Do they have specifics behind this, or are they just using it as a type of red herring that's going to manipulate me emotionally so that they get their way? Okay, I'm going to break off this episode for now. I do have a little bit of an announcement. I am working on opening an online philosophy and literature school, and this is the name of it, Erd Steppes Academy. The website is not up yet. I have done some of the paperwork I've got to do. I have to do a little bit more, but you will be able to, once it's up, enroll in classes and get more in depth. In these, we're going to start slow, but with the online school, you're actually going to have whole courses that are devoted to much more detailed topics. For example, there's going to be a whole course on diagramming sentences. This is going to be one of the first ones I roll out. It will be not only for people that want a better grasp of grammar and a better grasp of logic, but it will also be useful for people who English is their second language, because it's going to give them, the how and the whys of the language. So that is all in the works, and I will keep everybody updated through this podcast when it officially comes online and when people are able to sign up for classes. But I hope all of you are doing well, and I hope all of you are staying safe, and I will talk to you all again really soon.